Yes. Hello, my beautiful friends. What an amazing day it is. Happy Wednesday. Hopefully you are having a beautiful week. All downhill from here. We've got a lot of business to attend to today. We're talking about how the treasonous intelligence agencies betrayed President Trump and all of us back during the 2020 election. And of course, we know that President Trump was in charge of many of these agencies back in 2020. And they knew a lot of things that they did not communicate to him. And they even called him names in the analysis. They said, this is a Vulgarian in the White House. They did not like his policies, and so they buried the truth. Information that we should have known and we still should know is now leaking out and is being discussed courtesy of John Solomon and Just the News. We've got an entire report queued up on this one that we'll zoom in on that came from a very seemingly accomplished Ombudsman over to the CIA, somebody giving them an analysis of what he thought happened back during the 2020 thievery. So we'll dig into that. Then remember Robert Mueller. Of course, that was the special counsel who concocted a whole investigation that really deviated a lot of Trump's first term. And turns out there's a whistleblower now. Chuck Grassley, of course, kind of the whistleblower whisperer. He now is revealing to us that entire process was even more weaponized and politicized than we even knew. So the FBI and all of the people who were on that team, including guys like Andrew Weissman, were engaging in serious misconduct that, of course, perverted the outcome and weaponized the entire process against the president and his first administration. Then we'll talk about James Comey and Letitia James. These were two people who were originally indicted before Lindsay Halligan, the U.S. attorney out of the Eastern District of Virginia, was thrown out of her seat. Well, they're appealing this. We've got the reply now from the DOJ that is making its way up through the Fourth Circuit, and we'll go through that to see what their arguments are. Not good news for Comey and Letitia, who, of course, want this all to just go away, be forgotten about, and move on. But the DOJ is not done yet. So we'll see what the appeal looks like and unpack that. Before we turn our attention, we knew that there was a vote on the Pam Bondi Epstein subpoena. That has now officially come down. We'll see what is inside that. And we also have another letter from the Oversight Committee, which is going over to Epstein's prison guard. And we see the letter, and we also are going to remind ourselves about what happened in that criminal case, because they were charged with crimes for basically lying and obstructing the investigatory process. And then they got a sweetheart plea deal, and the guards got away with essentially deferred prosecution. So we'll go into that. We'll get some reaction. We got some good clips and some major documents to attend to today. Thanks for being here. Thanks for subscribing and all the things. This is our last official live stream from Arizona. We're hitting the road tomorrow to make our way out to DC. And we're excited for the journey. And we're glad that you're joining us as we now wrap things up here and move on to the next episode out in DC. So we're hitting the car first thing tomorrow morning, and we'll be on the roads. Should have some updates, but you know how it is on a road trip. We'll see what ultimately happens and how the internet works and all the things. So we may just be posting some updates rather than having live streams tomorrow and Friday. But hopefully you're checking back to see how business is developing across the nation. Of course, this is Watching the Watchers. My name is Robert Gouveia, formerly practicing criminal defense attorney, still an attorney. We're just practicing now in the court of public opinion. And we've got some serious business to attend to. So let's get right to it. Deep state betrayal of the president and of Americans. We now have new information showing that United States intel agencies hid information from President Trump back in 2020. And there was a lot of meddling. And we saw previously that there was a newly released report that showed that the Chinese had actually accessed a bunch of voter registration databases. When you juxtapose the access and the consumption of the list by Chinese intelligence, and you match that with all of the other driver's licenses that were imported by the tens of thousands into the United States that had barcodes from Michigan that actually worked, that shows we've got a serious problem on our hands, because they can essentially take what's on the list, make real IDs, share those IDs with bad, nefarious actors, create absentee ballots, and then go cast those ballots as real ballots, as legitimate ballots, because how are you going to validate whether they're fake? The ID matches the list, looks as real as anything. So now we're learning that when the intelligence agencies got their hand on this, they knew a lot more than they were telling the president. And in fact, they were even calling him names. They were saying that he was a Vulgarian in the Oval Office and that they did not want him to have access to this stuff because if he had access to the stuff, then it, of course, would validate all of the claims of the election fraud. So our own intelligence agencies were keeping information away from Trump, which some might call treasonous, since he, of course, is the commander in chief. A big problem. So we'll get into the report here coming up. It is a 20-page doozy that shows just how perverted the intelligence apparatus actually is. And it was written by this guy called Barry Zulauf. He's over at the Johns Hopkins Center and is a very accomplished, credentialed person. As you can see, he's a lecturer on intelligence analysis, faculty member over in Georgetown, and has been doing this for a lot. He's the president of the International Association for Intelligence Education. So the guy's high up there in terms of respect and accolades. He is also the Defense Intelligence Officer for Counter-Narcotics as of August 2023. Been focused on transnational organized crime, threat finance. He was named back in June 2022 as the Director of National Intelligence Representative at the CIA Center for the Study of Intelligence. He spent 21 and 22 also as an intelligence fellow at Harvard, and he has previous service as the intelligence senior leader with the Drug Enforcement Administration and Naval Intelligence. He was originally selected by James Clapper of the DNI and has been in this space for a long time. Now he teaches over at Johns Hopkins, this guy right here called Barry Zulauf, and looks like a sharp dude, as you can see. So what the story is that more is coming out from him and from the internal documents that John Solomon has been getting his hands on. He writes that analysts inside the intelligence community, they sought to conceal evidence of Chinese influence literally from President Trump during the 2020 election. Trump was the president. Gina Haspel was Trump's first female CIA director that he appointed, and they apparently were not bubbling up this key information over to him because if they did, then of course he would have said, oh, told you the election was rigged. So they didn't want to do that. They said, we can't let our intel be used by that, quote, Vulgarian in the Oval Office to pursue policies toward China that they personally disagreed with. Now, this revelation is found within a January 2021 report written by and never before reported upon comments by the Analytic Ombudsman called Barry Zulauf, the guy we just learned about. He conducted a review of how the intelligence agencies actually handled the Russia versus the Chinese meddling efforts back in 2020. And one of his conclusions, we'll zoom in on the report, was that intelligence analysts downplayed China's actions because they had a disdain for the Vulgarian. Trump, the Vulgarian in there. And they did not want to support his policies or his priorities as they relate to China because literally, quote, they personally disagreed with it, which is absolutely a violation of the chain of command, right? They should have resigned if they personally disagreed with this, but you can't hide information. That's kind of a betrayal. Some might say that's treasonous, and maybe they should be prosecuted for that. But of course, Just the News reported, and we covered this yesterday, that U.S. intelligence knew since early 2020, and we saw this yesterday, we had tens of thousands of fake IDs come in that literally worked in Michigan. You scan the barcodes, it validated with the Michigan database. Insane. Beijing was gaining access to the American voter registration data. They used that information. The report said it was all redacted and all highly watered down, but they said it was only to just conduct opinion analysis, like China's now like a pollster. Well, we're just curious how this election's going to go. Maybe we'll make a bet on it over on one of the markets. It was, of course, much deeper than that. This was a weaponized operation, and we still are learning very little about it, unfortunately. Now, this is not the only piece of evidence they write, pointing to Chinese and election influence in 2020, although much of the activities still remains classified from China. Why? Who knows? They conducted, Just the News, a thorough review of all the publicly available intelligence assessments, saying there is credible evidence that Chinese government-linked cyber hackers and social media troll farms took aim in 2020. And it makes sense. We had COVID going on. If you recall, it was madness. Nobody knew what the heck was happening. And judges and courts and various secretaries of state, all sorts of third-party NGOs and 501c3s were suing everybody. We covered dozens of lawsuits here back during that time. And we saw that they were perverting all of the election rules. Then we woke up and Joe Biden got 81 million votes, the most in history, more than Obama, more than Trump. Insane numbers. Of course, there was rigging happening. We could all feel it and see it in the charts. Now, there are also indicators that the Chinese agencies played a role in 2020. Now, this guy, Zulauf, is a longtime intelligence officer. He wrote a report about it. He said, given analytical differences in the way that Russia and China analysts examine their targets, China analysts appeared hesitant to assess Chinese actions as undue influence or interference. They like to blame the Russians. It's always Putin, who bought like $100,000 or whatever the number was worth of ads. But they don't want to call out the Chinese. The analysts were reluctant. We'll read through the further report. And so they buried it. Now, Zulauf discussed his report on a podcast later after he published it. And he quoted an analyst, somebody who was working on this. And this person said, essentially, quote, I don't want my analysis going to the White House, where that Vulgarian in the White House will use it to pursue policies toward China with which I personally disagree. First question, who is that intelligence analyst? Number two, is that person a foreign agent, a Chinese affiliate who is helping to prevent the truth from making its way back to the White House so that the White House, the commander in chief, could make some policy distinctions or decisions based on that report? There was another article back from a 2023 speech, and that analyst was also quoted as saying, I don't want my intelligence going to the White House because I might personally disagree with it. Now, he went on to point out that there were various errors in the way of thinking, saying intelligence belongs to us, the community, not to you, not to a single analyst. Your job is to review the data and report it, analyze it, give your opinion and report it, not to prevent that information from being transmitted over to the appropriate party, saying they're not entitled to alter the intelligence products that they put forward. It's not standard intelligence tradecraft. The review also found that allegations of Russia meddling and Chinese meddling were being measured based on differing standards, meaning that Russia may have taken actions that were determined to be interference and influence. But if China did the same thing, no problem over there. The Chinese didn't do anything wrong. Due to varying collection and insight into hostile state actions and actors' leadership intentions, the use of the terms influence was perverted. They made it fit for one country and ignored the other country, which was probably significantly more impactful to our elections. And we'll take a look at the report, but he noted in multiple areas that multiple national intelligence officers wrote an alternative analysis memo, which expressed alternative views on all of this. And these alternative views met with considerable organizational counterpressure. Okay, so the idea is think of it like a court decision or from the Supreme Court, right? You have the majority decision and then you have a dissenting view. One says, this is how I interpret the law, and this is the way that we're going to go as the official decision of the court. And then you have the dissenters on the other side saying, well, actually, we think it should go this way. So in this case, same thing's happening. There's a majority report, but if you were in the dissent, you were met with institutional pressure. Shut your mouth. Don't you talk about this because it goes against what we want the further policy to be. This, of course, was back during Trump's presidency, 2016 to 2021, 17 to 21 officially, won the 16 election. He comes in and he starts appointing people to the top of these agencies. Back then, we had John Ratcliffe. He was the lead of the DNI, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, which, of course, is now being led by Tulsi Gabbard. Now, Ratcliffe is over at the CIA. And he, now at the CIA, back then when he was ODNI, he agreed with the dissent and the alternative views. He said, no. China's not just out there monitoring the polls and American opinion. China is, in fact, attempting to influence the election, literally, trying to undercut Trump's presidency because, as we know, Trump was, back in 2016, pretty hard on China, saying that they were manipulating their money and wanting to sanction them and more. Now, the majority view said that the Chinese did not ultimately try to meddle. They say, no, it's not China. But the minority view, led by the National Intelligence Officer for Cyber and other teams, said, yeah, China did. They did try to influence the election to literally hurt Trump's reelection prospects. And anytime that anybody said, there were some problems in the election, the first response was, you're a conspiracy theorist. In fact, people went to jail for this. A lot of people did. We assessed that China, quote, did not employ interference efforts and considered but did not deploy influence efforts intended to change the outcome of the U.S. election. And that is always how it's been. No evidence of fraud. Well, there is evidence of fraud. Well, no evidence of widespread fraud. Yes, there is. It's widespread. It's everywhere. Well, no evidence of widespread fraud that altered the outcome of the election. Yes, there was. But all of it was buried, of course. Said, we have high confidence in this judgment. And China did not view the election outcome as being advantageous enough to impact or to go in and try to impact the election because they could get caught meddling and then there'd be a big problem about it. But of course, our intelligence agencies are burying it. So if they do that, China's in a unique position because if they can impact the outcome of the election, if they can gobble up voter registration lists, if they can then import tens of thousands of fake IDs, use those to go cast ballots that match the voter registration lists, and they do that, we can't admit that they've done that. We understand that if we do admit that, then the whole election is perverted. The entire facade of democracy that we all labor under gets deleted. We go, what? A foreign country can come in here and just pervert the whole system? That means the whole system is fraudulent. So they can't allow that to happen because the whole system might collapse. The majority view said that Chinese state media and their criticism of Trump related to China and its response to COVID remain consistent in the lead up to the election. And remember, Trump was calling it the China virus, and they were all saying, that's a racist statement. You can't say that about the Chinese. He said, it's not racist at all. It comes from China. And by the way, our own intelligence agencies were funding and outsourcing the production of the virus over to Wuhan and enabling that to perpetuate. So we assess that Beijing's risk calculus against influencing the election and their probable judgment was any attempt to influence the election could do lasting damage to U.S. and China ties. So our majority view of the intelligence idiots, they said, they didn't do anything because it would have been too damaging and detrimental, saying Beijing probably judged that Russia's efforts damaged Moscow's position. And so, of course, China wouldn't want to be in the same position as Putin. But the minority view, which obviously is going to be opposite or different than the majority view, was written by this guy, in part, Christopher Porter. He assessed with others that the Chinese did try to undercut Trump in his re-election race. They wrote in the minority, they said, the National Intelligence Officer for Cyber assesses that China took at least some steps to undermine former President Trump's re-election chances, primarily through social media and official public statements in media. Now, the NIO also assesses that some of their influence efforts were intended to at least indirectly affect U.S. candidates, political processes, and more. Now, this view delivers from the IC assessment because it does give more weights to indications that Beijing preferred former President Trump's defeat and the election of a more predictable member of the establishment instead, in this case, Joe Biden. And that Beijing implemented some and later increased its election influence efforts, especially over the summer of 2020, when it looked like Trump was going to win. Then all of a sudden, COVID comes on around February, March. We get the national emergency. Trump comes out swinging against China, and then they escalate their efforts. The NIO assesses that these indications are more persuasive than other information indicating that China decided not to interfere. So in other words, looks like they did intervene and did interfere more than they didn't. The assessment also added that the National Intelligence Officer for Cyber agrees that we have no information that they tried to interfere with the election processes. So some agreement there. So then Ratcliffe, who's now at the CIA, he released a letter back in January 21, wherein he stood by the National Intelligence Officer. He said, I do not believe the majority view expressed by the intelligence analyst fully and accurately reflects the scope of the Chinese government's efforts to influence. He was back then ODNI. He said the majority view expressed in the ICA with regard to China's actions falls short of the mark for several reasons. So what we're going to look at here coming up is this report, which says that the methodology for coming to these determinations, for coming to these conclusions, whether in the majority or in the dissent, were perverted. They were not in alignment with traditional standards of statecraft, tradecraft, and it was not accurate on that basis. The methodology was so bad that the conclusions cannot be trusted, saying the ICA gives the false impression that the cyber division is the only analyst who holds this view. Now, he's not. A fact that the Ombudsman found during his research when this guy, Barry Zulauf, when he went and interviewed a bunch of these people, all they tried to do is place these people on a metaphorical island. They attached his name alone to the minority view and like, oh, he's just some weird conspiracy theorist. The current CIA director said back then, Ratcliffe, he wrote, "It is clear to me that different groups of analysts who focus on election threats from different countries are using different terminology to communicate about malign actions. And the definitions are also not being standardized across the board." He said, it's not even meeting tradecraft standard number 1. You've got rules on how you do these analyses. Now, Ratcliffe said, "I'm adding my voice in support of the stated minority view based on all of my evidence. And I'm coming to the conclusion that the PRC, China, sought to influence the 2020 federal elections, raising the need for the intelligence community to address the underlying issues with China as articulated and outlined above." Now, it didn't come out of the blue. They tried to influence Cambodia. They tried to create Spamouflage Dragon, online influences. And Global News reported that Canadian intelligence also was warning Justin Trudeau up in Canada. Also reported that we saw that they hacked the UK and they analyzed voter registration data. They wrote a bombshell assessment in April 2020, and it was not declassified until Biden's DNI ultimately did so in 2022. She said Chinese intelligence officials analyzed multiple election data and voter registration databases, and then, as we saw, imported gobs of fake IDs. So influence operations are everywhere. And the problem is that the analysis of the influence operations are not accurate. And more comes from this report. So let's take a look at it. And take a look at this date, man. It's like, gosh, if we're living in a simulation, it's like, okay, there you go. So he writes this report, January 6, 2021, the day that the very intelligence agencies wrecked the electoral count and had dozens, if not hundreds, of federal agents in the crowd goading people and shooting them in the face from the upper terrace on the Capitol building. So he writes this on January 6th. This goes over to the Select Committee on Intelligence, which at that time was Chairman Rubio and Vice Chairman Warner, who's still a Democrat, who's still in Congress. He says, all right, guys, now this letter responds to your letter of me. This is from Barry Zulauf, who is the IC Analytic Ombudsman. He's going to come in and give us a kind of an independent review on what he thinks is going on. And of course, he's working at the ODNI. Trump is the president at this time for just a couple more weeks until Biden is sworn in on the 20th. He says, this letter responds to your letter to me, asking for an independent review of possible instances of the politicization of intelligence, meaning we cannot trust their reports. And we already saw this back with the 2017 ICA, which the Obama intelligence people created with John Brennan, James Clapper, James Comey, Barack Obama, and the rest of his cabinet, essentially. They all said that the Russians interfered with that election, and they stuck the Christopher Steele PP tape dossier in a super secret classified annex that nobody could see. And they compartmentalized all of the intelligence so that only certain people could see various bits and pieces. This was the same intelligence community, the same CIA, where Brennan was screaming at staffers who were writing these reports saying, you have to be a team player. Okay, they had a minority view that the Russians did not impact anything and really didn't even interfere. They bought some like Facebook ads and they buried it and they tucked it away in the ICA. Then they gave Obama, they pulled the presidential daily briefing off of his desk. They substituted it with this fake report called the 2017 ICA. And that became the pretext of the whole Russia collusion hoax. And we got Robert Mueller and Trump's entire first term, like 2 years of it, were dogged down by Robert Mueller and the rest of these lying hacks. So we know that there's a pattern here about how they politicize these things, and they did it again to keep the data out of the public eye. The letter transmits my findings, which are laid out more fully in detail, and I'm happy to give you a further classified briefing if you want it right back in 2021. He says, the United States is in a hyper-partisan state, unlike any in recent memory. And boy, well, I think it's gotten even more hyper-partisan since January 2021. The country is divided along political ideology and racial lines to the point where civil discourse has become difficult, if not impossible. And it's like 10 times worse now than it was then. The polarized atmosphere has threatened to undermine the foundations of our republic, penetrating even into the intelligence community. Little did we know, Trump had not had his house raided yet in Mar-a-Lago. Trump had not been charged for January 6th with multiple criminal violations for conspiracy and other things by Jack Smith, an illegitimate prosecutor. So we were just warming up. This was like pregame. Though, as intelligence professionals, we still have an ethical responsibility to remain unbiased and objective in our work. We are human beings, and of course, we can still feel pressure from society and our political leaders. Pressures from our political leaders have sometimes placed demands on us that have translated into what might seem like bias or loss of objectivity. In most cases, what we see is the entire system responding to and resisting pressure from the outside rather than attempts to politicize intelligence by our leaders or our analysts. Now, in this environment, characterized by the loss of unintentional loss of objectivity, there have been a few incidents where we documented individuals or groups of individuals taking willful actions that, whatever their motivations, had the effect of politicizing the intelligence. It's politicized, hindering objective analysis, injecting bias into the intelligence process. This report lays it out. So the bottom line is this: Rubio and Warner, have the ODNI published products that adhered to analytical standards? Yes, within the scope of the Tradecraft review explained below. So they're following the rules. Now, have officials politicized or attempted to politicize intelligence, exercise or attempted to exercise undue influence on the analysis, production, or dissemination process of this intelligence product related to election security? So, yep, some products are good. They do follow the analytical standards. Great job. You're doing your job. Amazing. Well done. But in another case, have you exercised undue influence? Answer, yes. In some cases, documented below, they're trying to disseminate these products, and they're specifically related to election security. And this is so problematic because Trump was the president at this time. Okay. He was still in office. These are his own intelligence agencies that are lying and rigging the intelligence. And he's the president again, and we have a lot of the same questions. Have definitions or analytic tradecraft been altered? Have they been misapplied or applied inconsistently on these products? Answer, yes, they have. Have the ODNI followed standard procedure for drafting, editing, and approving these things? And anything related to election interference, did they disseminate them? Have they followed the rules? Answer, no. Not in all cases as documented below. So it's a disaster. By taking on this report, the IC recognizes where we have not met our responsibilities to be objective. By taking up the recommendations here, the intelligence community shows that it is already taking steps to correct this, and we're working to ensure that it does not happen again. Yeah, right. So here's more. He writes, I'm the analytic ombudsman from the IC. Grants me authority to investigate a bunch of things, and that's what I'm doing. In his appointment letter to me, DNI Ratcliffe conveyed his personal commitment to our obligation to provide an independent avenue to validate whether they're doing their job appropriately. Now, here's where he gets into the inappropriate, altered, misapplied, inconsistent tradecraft. He writes, my review, conducted in response to intelligence community complaints about the election threat issue, surfaced a number of examples of altered tradecraft and misapplied or inconsistent definitions. And due to varying collection and insight into hostile state actors and their leadership intentions and domestic influence campaigns, the definitional use of the terms called influence and interference are applied differently. So for Russia, if Russia likes a Facebook post, that's election interference. That's election influence. If China steals voter registration databases and then imports tens of thousands of fake IDs? Well, they're just monitoring public opinion. A formal definition document was published by the NIC in June 2017, but there's no parallel document for China. And it seems that the Russia document is not widely known across the agencies, at least not outside the election threat team. So the terms were applied inconsistently across the analytic community, and failure to explain the definitions. If you can't even define the terms, how can you come with a logical conclusion that uses the terms? It's failing various Tradecraft standards called 1, 2, and 6, explaining, given the way and the analytical differences between Russia and China and how they examine their targets, China analysts appeared hesitant to assess Chinese actions as interference. They appeared reluctant to have their analysis on China brought forward because they tended to disagree with the administration's policies. Trump is the president at the time, saying in effect, quote, "I don't want our intelligence used to support those policies," which is traitorous. This behavior would constitute a violation of another analytic standard called B, which is you have to create independent political considerations of these analyses. On the other hand, the Russia analysts assessed that there was clear and credible evidence of Russia election influence because, of course, they had to be consistent. They said that Russia helped Trump steal the election from Hillary Clinton. She even is on video saying, election was stolen from me, womp, womp, womp. So in that regard, they were happy to continue to say that the Russians had involvement, but China did not. They said that IC management was slowing down or not wanting to take their analysis to customers, claiming that it was not well received and it frustrated them. They saw this as a suppression of intelligence, bordering on the politicization of this. So other people say, oh yeah, no, they're here rigging everything. I need to take that up to my IC boss. And they said, no, it's suppressed and it's being politicized. Now, at minimum, another violation of the analytic standard for timeliness. You just stall it out so it doesn't actually reach where it needs to go. ODNI leaders were focusing on presenting intelligence as part of a story arc, highlighting significant trends in the way that customers could consume these products rather than reporting each individual item. This incongruity might not have occurred if there was more consistent communication about the differences. Now, ODNI officials, this is again back during Trump's first term, they were engaging with policymakers. They said that these customers, like the senators and others, they did notice the result, particularly in the difference in volume and the frequency of the levels of intelligence coming from China and Russia. These differences were not intentional, but a result of different collection and analysis rhythms. And subtle differences and their inconsistent application did make a difference in how customers consume the reports. Now, according to interviews with NIC officials, policymakers were probably not aware of the behind-the-scenes machinations of the production and the dissemination processes. These foundational analytic shortcomings contributed to instances of and led to other instances of at least the perceived politicization of the intelligence. They had needlessly long review times. They had differences in conclusions. They made public statements on one hand, and then they had positions that were already established by the agencies in the other hand. So put another way, they lied to us. None of this happened in a vacuum, but the dispute appears to have largely begun with misapplied or inconsistent analytic definitions. Now, he writes about some specific instances. He says, after conducting a thorough review, I found several instances where there were attempts to politicize the intelligence. The most egregious example is the talking points provided alongside a written introductory statement delivered but not written by the National Counterintelligence Security Center called Bill Evanina. That was back on March 10, 2020. COVID is just spreading around like wildfire. Evanina also issued a July ODNI public statement about foreign election interference and another August 7th report and a press release, both of which came from the NIC. Analysts also refer to statements by the DNI in another article published by The Hill. These statements left the impression that, quote, the IC thinks, but that was not actually right. That was a gross misrepresentation of the established IC views. So they would seed one narrative in the public, but the actual communities in their intelligence gathering had a different opinion. According to the director, when asked about the assessments shared in March and in August, he said he assumed that they represented the entire agency because NIC and other officials gave it to him and he went and seeded it into the country accordingly. They, in fact, did not represent the views as discussed below. There was a March 10th talking points memo. They were drafted presumably by ODNI staff. He says, however, I was not able to find one individual who even admitted to writing them. Amazing. Most officials say in the passive voice, they say, oh no, did you write this? No. Where'd they come from? Well, they were drawn from existing reporting, and they were shaped by other officials, including Ambassador Grinnell. The main drafters were not analysts, and that was probably a major contributing factor to the perceived differences for the talking points, the differences between what they were pushing to the media and the established IC view. Analysts point out that there were substantive differences between talking points and what the IC actually thought. He looked at emails, and they show that those who drew up the talking points did partially coordinate them and were informed of their concerns, but did not completely consider the concerns in the final version. There was widespread reluctance among intelligence professionals to even deliver them. The reluctance on the part of seasoned officers should have been a red flag, but it didn't stop them from releasing the statements because they needed the talking points to go out. So he has identified a long story arc of, at the very least, perceived politicization of intelligence. Guidelines on special review procedures were promulgated by the ODNI and the CIA leadership, but according to interviews, it shows that not everybody was even aware of them. Interviewees commented, if there are such guidelines, they're not even well promulgated, and there was an overall pattern of perceived politicization stemming from the inconsistent application of the definitions. Another memo that was published back on May 2020, suffered from a severe slowdown and major changes to coordinated assessments in the drafting, review, and the approval process. Analysts noted that they and a wide range of other analysts participated early in analytic work leading up to this. They feel that the first drafts followed the general agreement of the community, but then a revised draft came back and it was substantially changed, leading with intelligence gaps that seemed to undermine the threat assessment. So somebody cut out all the paragraphs that were the most damning. The draft led with intelligence gaps, and it turns out that they buried the lead about the threats. The then NIC chair, immediately before becoming the principal executive, he's the guy who changed it. In a follow-up interview, he stated that he did this because it was good tradecraft to lay out the analytic environment, including what is not known. The draft was also held up by Grinnell for weeks before publication and underwent what appears to be politically motivated editing by Trump's own people. Analysts recounted that the NIC and DNI's changes were not fully re-coordinated with the community. So they write a report, somebody gets it, they change it, and it's different from what the community actually produced. The result was a final product whose delayed publication meant it diverged sharply from the up-to-date IC view that was communicated in other documents. He says, I have email exchanges to document this delay, allusions to political repercussions, frustration from intelligence professionals with the delay. These standards are a violation of their rules. You can't delay these things because intelligence goes bad. According to interviews, the established practice does not include the DNI actively participating in the review chain. As a political appointee, there is a potential conflict of interest. And as Ratcliffe has stated, back then he was DNI, on the other hand, just because it is unusual to have a DNI involved, it does not mean it is necessarily wrong to do that. And according to other standards, they have the right to an analytic conclusion as long as it's supported by the intelligence. And so he says, again, another violation of Tradecraft Standard 3. So it goes on and you get the point, but NIC officials, they also pointed to other senior officials who intervened in the changes to the conclusions. The actual analysts write a report, goes up to the boss, they change it, saying that they were overly sensitive to political customers who saw the dissonance between China and Russia. Ratcliffe disagreed with the analytic line on China. He said, we're missing Chinese influence on the United States. Their actions are intended to affect the election. Ratcliffe wrote as much as a Wall Street Journal oppositional ed. Ultimately, the DNI insisted in putting material on China in and was aware analysts disagreed and probably still do. But as a result of final published analysis, they felt was an outrageous misrepresentation of their analysis. Ratcliffe said, I know my conclusions are right. I can see the intelligence. Many analysts think I'm going off script, but they don't realize that I did it based on intelligence. So there was an alternative analysis memo back in October 2020. It expressed alternative views on Chinese election influence. These views were met with considerable organizational counterpressure, which we'll address later. ODNI has an obligation to ensure that these views are expressed if they're different, and a healthy culture brings them all into one report. And in my discussion, Ratcliffe agreed with the concerns expressed in the memo and was aware that most analysts did not hold that view. Not to include all intelligence would also be another violation of the standard. There was also undue influence on the production. Says there were strong efforts to suppress the analysis of any alternatives. Officials reported that CIA officials rejected the coordination comments and tried to downplay the analysis of alternatives. And management from CIA was contacting everybody. And he says, of course, you can decide what politicization is, but my objective view and my independent view is that there absolutely was politicization of the data. So a lot more here. He gives us some recent history. And in conclusion, he says, looking back over the past year, it is evident that when we began mischaracterizing the assessments, officials escalated it into ongoing widespread perception of politicization and the loss of objectivity. It doesn't need to be overt. These reports document the reality of both attempts to politicize and perception of politicization on intelligence. Writing, no ODNI official has stated that reviews or edits were phrased in a way that was explicitly political. Instead, the leadership, they were seeking ways to deliver intelligence in a way that Trump would consume. Well, he doesn't like to know these things. He doesn't care about that, so take it out of there. Top officials faced enormous pressure to balance between IC assessments and customer demands. The pressure filtered back down the chain, and the analysts perceived their work as being politicized in contravention of the standards. Their response to the perceived and sometimes real attempts resulted in a loss of objectivity. And when they face perceived politicization, they have to come to me and explain to us what actually is going on. And so he says, IC officials, whether politically appointed or not, must not make statements that appear to impact the analysis. We should have clear distinctions. We need to have objectivity and more. Now, as one person has stated, and I paraphrase, he says, intelligence is the only great function of the state that does not come to the top decision makers with an agenda. We have ethics we need to follow. If we lose objectivity, there's no reason for us to exist, which is exactly right. This report has presented the findings, and I have made some recommendations for action, and he lists them all out here. And of course, the document is now released. But we've seen this happen. I mean, they made up the Russia collusion hoax. John Brennan buried fake intelligence in a super secret classified annex that nobody could read, and then used that as the basis for the entire Russia collusion hoax that we all had to live through for multiple years. And so John Solomon is the guy who's getting his hands on these materials and bringing this to our attention. And he was over on with Steve Bannon, and he had this to say about what we're learning.
If Tulsi Gabbard looked Mark Warner into the face and said, sir, we were told for 6 years that there was no foreign intrusions in our election. We've now indicted Iranians for hacking into one voter database. We now have evidence that 18 other states' voter databases were penetrated by China. And the reason you and I don't know about that is that a series of intelligence analysts and officers under Donald Trump and Joe Biden put party before country. They decided they were not going to tell the country. They were not going to tell the Congress. They were not going to tell the president of the United States that China did these things because they didn't want to give Donald Trump ammunition on his China policy, because that is what the ombudsman concluded. On the record, there is a report that's been sitting with nobody noticing it. The Intelligence Committee ombudsman saying that the CIA intentionally kept the president and the country in the dark because they didn't like Donald Trump's policies, even used disparaging names to describe the commander-in-chief they're supposed to be working for. We ought to find out if any of those officers still work for the CIA, because they should be fired. But she could have done that because she has all of this evidence. And by the way, she has a lot more evidence than what I've been trying to squeeze this out. She has oodles more evidence. It is more damning than what I've reported, and she's been sitting on it. Why? I don't know. She didn't deploy it today. The president knows of this evidence. The White House chief of staff knows of this evidence. They went into, I think Kash Patel has answered the imminent threat pretty interestingly on Iran. He's talked about China. He brought up the driver's licenses today. That was important. Ratcliffe seems a little bit more engaged, but Tulsi seems to just be roadkill. She's not using the data in front of her agency to tell a story that's much more compelling.
What the heck is going on up there? The gratuitous, the gracious interpretation is they're just holding on to all these things and they're going to release the mother load soon enough. But Tulsi is roadkill. She's got all this data. She's not releasing it. I think sunlight in many ways is the best disinfectant. We need to know about these things so that we can put pressure on our Congress people to actually change the laws and open up public hearings if we need to validate that the people who are behind these politically biased analyses are no longer there. If you can't do your job and you have a disagreement with the administration and it's going to rile you up so much that you can't perform what you were hired to do on behalf of America, regardless of who the president is, then it's time for you to go. And in some cases, if you're literally hiding evidence, if you're burying it, stalling it out, and weaponizing it, then you should probably go to jail for that, because that is now undermining the commander-in-chief. It's undermining the role of the chief executive. It's essentially committing fraud from within your own position of power. So, John Solomon, wondering where the evidence is. We know Tulsi Gabbard was down there during the Fulton County ballots raid, and maybe this is part of a much broader operation that will ultimately be revealed to us. Time will tell. We'll be here when it drops. Thanks for subscribing and joining as we do. All right, now let's turn our attention over to the Mueller report, because, of course, a lot of the weaponized intelligence led to the first full special counsel investigation and the first Trump impeachment, starting here. Whistleblower now speaks out, saying that the Mueller investigation from the so-called special counsel into President Trump was even more weaponized and politically biased than we even knew. Miranda Devine got her hands on a letter from Chuck Grassley, sent this one over earlier this week to Pam Bondi and Kash Patel. And he says, hey guys, guess what? I've got some documents and excerpts that show that what Robert Mueller, Andrew Weissman, and the rest of these people like Andy McCabe, they were all using this excuse to attack the president's first administration. And many of these same people, or let me say their parallels, Andy McCabe's gone, Klein Smith is gone, but many of the secret moles who did this back then are still in the office and in these agencies right now. So Miranda gives us a little bit of background. She says, an FBI agent who was assigned back then to special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into Trump's campaign in 2016 has now made bombshell allegations, charging that misconduct, political bias, and overzealous thoughts permeated the entire team to the point of festooning the walls of their office with anti-Trump cartoons. And then they go on MS Now with Jen Psaki, and they tell Jen, we're just doing our job to protect American democracy, while they hate the man that they're investigating, apparently independently and nonpartisanly. She says there was a let's get him attitude that colored the 2-year investigation into false claims that Trump colluded with Russia to win 2016. And this was the first attempt to destroy his presidency from the very beginning so that he couldn't do anything. And it was almost successful. The allegations were first made back in December 2020. Then agent was interviewed as part of an internal FBI probe into alleged misconduct by a supervisory intelligence analyst called Brian Otten, a name we've heard here before, a central figure in both the Russia collusion hoax and the Hunter Biden laptop cover-up. We have enemies inside the gates that are perverting things on both ends. They use their position to target their political opponents and then turn around and use their position to protect their political favored class. All of this we've covered here for years, but you remember this guy, Robert Mueller. He, of course, testified, and then many people thought he had Alzheimer's or something. But in a Sunday night letter to Pam Bondi and Kash Patel, Chuck Grassley, who is the whistleblower whisperer, he detailed the most troubling aspects of the agent's account, saying it confirms longstanding concerns that the political bias rotted the decision-making process within the team. The American public deserves answers. We've got the full letter queued up, but of course, we remember that the investigation ran until March 2019. Trump came in January 2017, and for years, they spent $30 million and then ultimately said, oh, there's no evidence of Russia collusion. In May 23, another special counsel, John Durham, who did nothing, released a report describing the Trump-Russia probe as seriously flawed and said the FBI willfully ignored material that did not support the narrative of a collusive relationship between Trump and Russia because they didn't collude. But we still had to deal with it every single day. Trump-Russia collusion. Trump-Russia collusion. We had that Jake Tapper song that people made all day, 24/7, every day. Hillary saying the election was stolen. Then when they actually steal an election, then they come out and they blame us. How dare you not accept the results of the outcome of the election? Grassley has asked Bondi, can you please give us the emails? We already know Bondi is not really keen on releasing much of anything. Files and personnel records relevant to the agent's allegations by March 29th. So we'll see if those drop. Here's the letter that Chuck Grassley sent over to Pam and Cash, saying, all right, Pam and Cash, this is Chuck Grassley speaking. My office has obtained a December 2020 FBI FD 302 interview document that was conducted with an FBI agent who worked with Robert Mueller, the so-called special counsel. This agent was involved in the Crosswind investigation, which was a part of a subpart of called Crossfire Hurricane, which was the broader investigation. According to the interview document, the reason for the interview was an internal investigation regarding an allegation that an analyst called Brian Otten may have violated internal code, which is related to judicial proceedings. And in the report, the document details substantial allegations of misconduct and political bias that occurred within Robert Mueller's office. These are the same people that are pretty intelligent, I'll say. Andrew Weissman with his weird voice. He says that, you know, smart guy and he knows about American democracy, blah, 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 all the things. And then when it's time for him to turn over his cell phone to the government, oops, he enters the password wrong like 100 times. Oops. iPhone deletes itself, resets itself. Oh, it's a legal hack. Everybody's phone gets wiped before it's turned back over to the feds. How convenient. All of a sudden, they're idiots. They can't remember their 4-digit PIN. For example, the FD 302 states multiple personnel were removed from Robert Mueller's team because, quote, they saw concerning things and they voiced their concern. So you're fired. You don't want to be a part of our weaponized prosecution of the president. You're gone. Get out. Pack your bags and leave. It's also saying that former FBI deputy director, okay, the old Dan Bongino, Andrew McCabe, referred to the president in a derogatory manner. Andy McCabe, of course, is all over the cables. He got a big fat settlement, I believe, with the FBI, paid him a bunch of money. And now he's a media analyst who talks to us and lectures us about democracy. There was also an attorney who wanted to remove the negative tone of the remark in the document. The FD 302 specifically notes Aaron Zelensky, assistant special counsel to Robert Mueller, bias and states that the Mueller team, quote, created caricatures and cartoons that were anti-Trump and pasted them all over their disgusting, filthy cubicles. The FD 302 also notices instances where security protocols were violated and classified information was mishandled, as well as potential FISA abuses, including FISA renewals on Crosswind that were all unnecessary. Yet Kevin Kleinsmith allegedly said about FISA corrections, he says, we can't send this to the DOJ, can't let them know about it, or else we're in trouble. The FD 302 also states that an investigation into Tom Barrack should not have been opened. And finally, it also notes that alcohol was consumed by Mueller team members while they were on the clock for the taxpayer, getting hammered out there, doing beer bongs. I have listed the relevant excerpts below. Here's part of it. Potentially improper FISA renewals and misleading the FISA Security Council, saying the second big battle was when Ahmad asked Corey if we should renew FISA, or the court, I'm sorry, not counsel, for the third time. Corey said, no. Should we renew it? No. Corey, redacted, said that they were getting all of the information they needed from interviews with the target of the investigation who was cooperating. We already got everything we need. Corey said, we did not need to do a FISA because it would not give us anything more. And there was nothing in the past FISA that aided the investigation other than to prove that the target was being honest. Everybody's talking. He says, I also did not agree with renewing it for different reasons. So none of us wanted to use FISA. Now, as the investigation progressed, the facts that we originally thought meant one thing were learned to mean something else. Per reporting from another agency, and what we learned from the investigation up to that point of the third renewal, there were no corroborating facts that tied crosswind to certain facts that we thought were originally true. So we thought, oh, Trump-Russia collusion, get FISA warrants. We start to spy on the campaign, start to spy on the administration. And then they learn, oh, actually, there wasn't Alpha Bank cell phones or Yoda phones, or there wasn't a PP tape dossier that was actually going to be used as blackmail against them. Oops, sorry. So they said, For instance, there was nothing confirming Crosswind received a large money payment and nothing confirming Crosswind had a meeting in another country for the purposes of the initial allegation. I pointed out these specific corrections to the application. We filed to spy using FISA. We put facts in there in order to get that approved. Turns out those facts are wrong. So I pointed out these specific corrections to the application in numerous instances throughout the FISA certified copy process. This was back in 2018. I sent these edits to Kevin Kleinsmith, a lawyer. He says, what? We can't send this to the DOJ. Kevin set up a meeting with the DOJ and led a discussion on the FISA renewal. I provided arguments for how the information had changed our understanding of our initial analysis. It was all made up. In response, they said, well, we don't know that for sure. It could still be true. And that the statements they used in the FISA to describe the target was broad enough to cover the differing perspectives. Well, it wasn't only about that. And so it's also for this too. We can use it. So Spencer Bessett was the attorney for the FISA at the DOJ. Walter Giardina signed it as a case agent. Joe Nelson or Jennifer Redacted as well. So some agents saying there's no there. And they said, well, there kind of is though, isn't there? No, there's not. Well, are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. Okay, well, we weren't really talking about that anyways. We were talking about other things. And so that's why we need it. That's part one. B, there was also anti-Trump bias. Grassley says in this excerpt, he quotes from an interview. He says, this person is communicating to other FBI agents. He says, I believe Vivian Moon was removed from the investigation because she would not allow the investigation to become politicized. Shout out to Vivian Moon, okay? We appreciate you, Vivian. Thank you. She says, this is ridiculous. We're not going to weaponize this thing. They said, Vivian, you're fired. Get out. Corey, Burns, Murphy, and Tapin were all removed because they saw concerning things and they voiced their concerns. Shout out to Corey, Burns, Murphy, and Tapin. Michelle Taylor was a great agent. I heard her arguing with the prosecutors because one of the attorneys wanted to change the characterization that deputy director made toward President Trump. McCabe is, in my opinion, a liar and a hack and probably a traitor and somebody who is now being elevated to the top of the Democratic hierarchy. Apparently, McCabe referred to President Trump in a derogatory manner, I'm sure, and Taylor refused to change the tone of the 302 to reflect that McCabe spoke about him without the negative connotation. Okay, so she says, well, you called him an orange frost man or whatever, and so I'm putting that in the report. That's what you called him. So it goes in. Says, you're gone. Taylor left the bureau shortly after her time with the special counsel. Now, with the exception of me, anyone who disagreed with Ahmad or her line of thinking were also removed from the team. You're gone. Those who stayed were Gleason, Giardina, Lapari, Smith, and me. Now, I got along very well with Ahmad, despite disagreeing with her often, having many concerns about the investigation and having concerns about her security practices. So you've got some actually good, honorable agents who all had to be thrown out and exit. And the lying hacks, in my opinion, they're the ones who get to stay on because they're in alignment with Ahmad. Perfect. Now, there's also more. There was also bias exhibited by this guy called Aaron Zelensky. And there were anti-Trump drawings that were spread around the building. My opinions about the overall investigation are the same as Burnett's, which I read in the 302 of his interview that was released to the public. His 302, which is the interview document, got out, and I'm worried my thoughts will get out as well. Now, like I said earlier, I have a great relationship with most on the team, despite having significant concerns with what went on the team. I observed what I would consider bias on Team B. The general atmosphere was led by one young prosecutor called Aaron Zelinsky. Brandon Van Grack was also a prosecutor who worked on Team A, and I consider him to be a great person. There were caricatures and cartoons that were anti-Trump. Writer's note, blank blank provided a sketch of the office layout, which is attached to the file in 1A. It was used to describe where the anti-Trump caricatures were hung. And I'd really like to see what they were. Hopefully we get those documents soon. Chuck Grassley has not released those yet. And Grassley's pretty good about this. He likes to drip this stuff out and allow people to come out and respond to this. Maybe Aaron Zelinsky will say, I just wasn't anti-Trump. And then we see it, and it's, a drawing by some cartoonist. That is horrific. Then we see there were also improper FISA requests, calling it overzealous thoughts and bias that permeated in the investigation in an attempt to, quote, get someone. Saying, I believe that there are several things that were wrong with the investigation. First, and the most egregious, was that despite the change in our information, we still put out a third FISA renewal to continue our spying, which was the fourth FISA against the target. And second, there were overzealous thoughts and bias that permeated the investigation. There was a let's get him attitude rather than an independent, nonpartisan, neutral investigation just meant to determine the facts and the truth. Third, all of those who voiced a differing opinion were removed from the team. Get out. Fourth, we were told that there were SCO personnel, not FBI. That may be a direct quote in my journal, and the implications of this are far more reaching than just words. Now, fifth, like special counsel office personnel and not the FBI. Fifth, as described by another person, Barnett, there was a get someone attitude versus a normal investigative attitude of finding the truth of what happened. This attitude led to the FISA renewal. It led to search warrants. They opened up an investigation into Tom Barrack that all related to ethical dilemmas. And in my opinion, the Washington field office was asked to consider opening on Barrack earlier, but opined the investigation should have been on the agent who was interacting with Barrack, not Barrack himself. Grassley continues to share. He says this person called Zainab Ahmad allegedly also violated security protocols. Says special counsel team members allegedly also consumed alcohol while on the taxpayer's dime. What a bunch of drunks. Apparently, Loretta Lynch, who was the attorney general, brought Ahmad to the team. And apparently Andrew Weissman, who is so dumb he deleted all of his cell phone records, vouched for her and later regretted this. Jeannie Rhee had a shouting match with Ahmad. Ahmad was lax with security protocols, and I witnessed at least one instance that I later reported to our security official. For example, she brought classified documents to a meeting at the Washington field office without adherence to FBI security policy. Oh, maybe her house should be raided too. She brought her classified notebook to the meeting without a proper carrying bag, and what was worse, she came to the Washington field office from her residence. Meaning she kept her notebook at her home. Arrest her. John Bolton has already been charged for that. One of the only people with any real proximity to upper echelons of power who's been arrested. This was reported by myself. I reported it to security. The Washington field office attorney who was present at the meeting also noticed this and discussed it with me. In the beginning of the investigation, I reached out to Sally Moyer with my concerns that Ahmad had access to raw FISA info, but Moyer indicated, well, so what? This was acceptable because she was part of the investigative team, all documented in an email exchange with Moyer, and while it did not occur frequently, I did see alcoholic drinks being consumed while in the SCO team area. They're just ripping shots and prosecuting their political opponents. Wow. Most of what I articulated here is reflected in my journals as present sense impressions, but not the caricatures or the drinking. And we'd really like to see what those caricatures are. Now, Mueller, they also appear to have realized that they were engaging in wrongdoing. Well, it's for the greater good. We have to stop Orange Man bad. On numerous occasions, Gleason told me that I was capturing too much information electronically. She always said, and everyone knew, there's going to be an investigation into us. Murphy came over about a half dozen times and said we all needed professional liability insurance. For what? For what? If you're doing government work, you've got qualified immunity. You work for the government. They need it because they're so not doing government work. They're doing political work for the Democratic Party. Murphy had significant concerns with the scope of the investigation. Rosenstein wrote the scoping letter. There was a footnote number 4. In both my and Murphy's opinions, we were beyond the scoping letter at numerous points during the investigation. We're investigating things we're not allowed to look at. Murphy spoke up about this. She wanted to end the FISA at least a month before it stopped. I believe the main reason Ahmad opened an investigation on one subject, Barack, was because she knew the stream of investigation was coming to an end. They had no evidence. She wanted to extend the reason to remain on the special counsel's office team and also have a project for when she returned to her office back in New York. Wow. Now, the interviewee says that the documents exist to prove the wrongdoing. Says they're out there and get your hands on them. If possible, he says, I would get a copy of the last FISA and a copy of the predication. Look at the report from a couple of other U.S. government agencies as well. Our understanding of things changed during this investigation, and these 3 documents were disproven. They were filing fake, fraudulent FISA warrants. Despite this, the team still went on with the 3rd renewal of FISA. In the end, Murphy and I had the same thoughts as Corey and I. All of them knew this was illegitimate. They got illegal warrants, and the federal judges just signed off on them in the FISA court. So here's more from Grassley. He says, all right, based on everything I just shared with you, here's what we need. Pam and Cash, please help. The FD 302 confirms longstanding concerns. Political bias rotted the decision-making process within the Mueller team. The American public deserves answers, and so accordingly, Pam and Cash, please provide the answers to the following questions and responsive records no later than March 29th this year. 1, we want all emails relating to the FD 302 from all named custodians. This includes all the FISA-related emails. Provide all FISA applications, predication materials, and related reportings. Provide all journals referenced in this document we just read. Provide the 302 where Andy McCabe allegedly referred to Trump in a derogatory manner. What did he call him, Pam? Provide the Rosenstein scoping letter about what we can look into. Provide the 1A file, including all the anti-Trump drawings and caricatures so we can see them. And part of me wonders if Grassley already has some of this, right? This is kind of why he drips these things out. So he says, Pam, give me the drawings. Do you have the drawings? No, we don't have them. Okay, I do, and I know you have them too. Provide the email with Sally Moyer about Ahmad's alleged security violations, carrying around classified documents in a manila folder and bringing them to and fro. Was any investigation conducted into the allegations that Ahmad potentially handled classified info? And if not, why not? If yes, please provide all the records so that we can see. And 9, finally, does the DOJ policy allow consumption of alcohol at work? That might be complicated by Cash Patel drowning that beer with the hockey team, but he may have been off duty during that time. So I don't know if that counts as work. But if not, did the DOJ investigate the allegations that alcohol was consumed in the special counsel office team area? Okay, Cash at least wasn't in a conference room, for crying out loud. He was partying with American champions. If not, why not? If yes, provide all records. Right? So that one's like, I don't know. So thank you for your prompt review and your responses. If you have any questions, please contact my committee staff. Signed, sincerely, your friend, Chuck Grassley, Committee on the Judiciary Chairman. And man, we love a good Chuck Grassley drop. So that is now out. We got the report and the answers, which should be due back by March 29th. And this is evidence that is within the DOJ and the FBI's possession. And we have to see it because these people weaponize their offices to get Trump. And we're not asking to weaponize the DOJ and the FBI inappropriately. We just want accountability for the people who thus far have gotten away with all of this. They're just running around free. They're showing up on cable news, making a ton of money, getting celebrated and receiving accolades from the Democratic weaponized party. And there needs to be justice for this. So shout out to Chuck Grassley. Thank you, Chuck, for sending this. Pam and Cash, ball's in your court. Release those documents. We'll be here to review them. Thank you for joining us and subscribing as we do. Golly. All right. So we've got another update over here. We're going to the Comey case, and we have some good updates here. The James Comey appeal now getting a final reply from the United States of America, Pam Bondi and the DOJ saying, you're not out yet, James. Lindsay Halligan was properly appointed, and they're making their arguments to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. We know the case was dismissed on a lower level decision from the U.S. District Court from the Eastern District of Virginia. Cameron Curry said Lindsay Halligan was not appropriately appointed, and therefore none of the charges can stick. But now Bondi, Blanche, and Whitaker respond, and they give us their final brief and final reply on this matter. Now, before we got here, what we saw is that Comey went and got a bunch of individuals who, this is from the Eastern District of Virginia. And let me also share with you the docket, which I thought I had queued up, from the Fourth Circuit, so that we can see how many people Comey has brought in to support him, because, boy, there has been a lot of them. This is out of the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, and we had a ton of lawyers come in. So as soon as the case was dismissed, we had the DOJ file their response, and then we had all of this from friends of James Comey and the deep state. We had bipartisan former federal judges and former U.S. attorneys filing their amicus briefs right here, and the wagons are being circled. Bipartisan, blah, 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 legal foundation, more amicus briefs from a dozen people plus. Virginia Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. You can't prosecute James. He's amazing. Letitia James filed her response. Comey filed his responses. More amicus briefs here, which are friends of the court. So it's a bunch of people trying to influence exactly what's happening. And so as this starts, the DOJ responds and says, oh, gosh, for all the ink they spill, all the words on the page, Comey and Letitia James and their squad of amici, they don't refute the simple logic that shows that the Attorney General, Pam, lawfully appointed Lindsay Halligan to be the interim U.S. attorney under the law. Pam may appoint, quote, under the law, a U.S. attorney for the district in which one office is vacant. Now, no one disputes the office was vacant. The statute contains a single express exception. You cannot appoint people whom the Senate voted down. Lindsay Halligan never got a vote and never got voted down. No one disputes that her nomination was rejected. So the Attorney General in her appointment carries with it a maximum term of 120 days, but nothing in the text limits that to only one appointment. It follows that Pam was fully empowered to appoint Lindsay Halligan, even though the previous interim attorney served as well. So it's far from meaningless formalism. You should interpret the statute as it's written and find that Halligan and her indictment are both valid. She writes, the defendants here err. They say that the presence of a 120-day term under the law, or the fact that the district court gains appointment authority once that term expires, precludes Pam from making the appointment. But time-limited appointments do not in themselves preclude reappointment. And there is still no good reason from Comey and Letitia why the district court's appointment authority would oust Pam Bondi, her equal authority under 546. Congress commonly authorizes parallel means for temporarily addressing vacancies. The government needs to function. Okay, the idea is if you have a vacant spot, an office that is not filled, Pam can appoint, the AG can appoint somebody to fill that slot temporarily. Now, the court and in the lower level, they said once that first appointment expires, once the 120 days of that first interim appointment expires, you're done. Pam is by statute divested of the ability to appoint someone else again Instead, they say it reverts to the court, and the court can make the appointment, not the AG. They say that is not what the statute says. It says we have these parallel means. If the DOJ doesn't appoint somebody, then the court can't appoint somebody. But not that the DOJ is precluded from appointing somebody, and only the court can fill it after the first 120 days. Although defendants, like the district court, they fret. They say, well, the attorney general's position would render their authority insignificant. That worry overlooks the fact that Congress amended the law back in 1986. They gave the AG the primary authority to make these appointments. That regime, contrary to their otherwise suggestion, gives this a very wide scope. The executive branch has since 1986 typically worked with district courts to identify mutually agreeable appointees, despite taking the position, at least since 1987, that there is parallel authority under the law. Now, this is far from unprecedented. Comey is whining about this, saying, I'm under attack. He says a successive appointment, or they say a successive appointment was upheld already back in 1987 by the first court that ever addressed this after the statute was amended. And although Comey and Letitia's motions to dismiss the significance of that decision, they do not deny that in the ensuing decade, the executive branch repeatedly made successive appointments and that Congress amended the statute to match that practice. That history underscores the text of the statute. Now, Comey and Letitia, they fare no better in arguing that the alleged appointment defect requires a dismissal. They also don't dispute that Pam had ample authority to authorize Lindsay Halligan to seek and obtain these indictments. They offer no cogent reason to think that conferring Halligan the title of U.S. Attorney, opposed to some other title that would equally have authorized her, that prejudiced them in some way. They say that Halligan's appointment conferred on her all of the obligations of a government attorney, but none of the authority. So, in other words, Lindsay had to comply with grand jury secrecy and follow all of the other requirements, but suddenly couldn't actually indict anyone. If she has some of this power, then arguably she has it all. They urge this court to overrule centuries of Supreme Court precedent on the de facto officer doctrine based on the inferences that they draw from a few inopposite cases dealing with the invalid appointment of adjudicators. And they resist the AG's ratification of their indictments, but do not defend the district court's primary conclusion on that point. And so this court should reverse the dismissal of not only the indictments, but the invalidation of Lindsay Halligan. They say the statute's pretty clear here. Subsection A gives the AG the authority to appoint a U.S. attorney anytime the office is vacant. That office was vacant when Halligan was appointed. When Congress wanted to limit that authority, it did so expressly, specifying that the AG could make appointments except as provided in B, which says you can't do that if she was previously rejected. Halligan was not rejected. The statute has no other exceptions, and so she was properly appointed to a new 120-day term in which the indictments came down. Comey and Letitia, they then urge the court to engraft an additional exception, although they don't seem to agree exactly what that is. Letitia James, like the district court, she says that the statute gives the AG a single, you get one 120-day appointment. That's it. Comey says, no, the AG's initial appointment starts the 120-day clock. The clock runs out on the 120th day that an AG appointee is in office. So a little bit of nuance between the two. They derive both of those exceptions from subsection C, but they say that the court should infer other atextual exceptions that are not written in the law that limit Pam to one appointment and 120 days. But the fact that subsection C2 establishes a time limit for the appointment says nothing about the authority to make additional appointments for a new 120-day term. Nor, contrary to Letitia's suggestion, does the fact that the statute generally requires a U.S. attorney to live in the district, does it bolster her argument? Comey also strains to locate a proposed exception, which is relying on the indefinite article called A. He says a appointee is allowed, but not multiple appointees. If anything, the use of a person appointed refutes his argument, saying any person appointed by the AG may serve until the term expires. A only confirms that multiple unspecified persons can be appointed. So we're getting pretty textual at the moment because these are how their arguments are crafted. Unable to locate any support for her position, Letitia James turns to other statutes. And according to James, because the 210-day time limit in the Federal Vacancies Reform Act, another law, says other things, that doesn't apply to this argument here. Lots of technical analysis here. They say that their interpretation preserves the rules, but under their interpretation, the court is not being stripped of any power. District courts can still unilaterally appoint attorneys without the president or the Senate being involved at all. If it is vacant, they can do that. Recognizing a defect, Comey then shifts the goalposts, arguing that a court-appointed interim U.S. attorney must at least have the backing of a different branch. He may well prefer prosecutors who are loyal to judges as opposed to the president, but it's unclear why this court should attribute that preference to Congress in providing for the appointment of prosecutors who are wielding executive power. In any event, Letitia James and Comey and their speculation that authorizing the AG to make successive appointments would result in a hampering of the courts is unsupported by history. Everyone agrees here, Section 541 has remained the norm. But that is so even though administrations of both parties have historically agreed, with no court questioning it until last year, that the AG may make successive appointments. They say if the government wins, the executive branch might just keep appointing people. 120 days expire, 120 days expire, and more. These are machinations that would burden the AG with the need to personally appoint somebody every 120 days in 94 different jurisdictions. This is unlikely to happen. We've taken the view in the executive branch that parallel appointment authorities exist, and we have all agreed on that until Trump came in. Instead, it has generally been able to work with the courts and the AG in order to fill the seats. This court rejected similar arguments in other cases, and history does not support limiting this to a single 120-day period. Against the weight of the history, they point to another memo from the OLC. But even that memo said, Section 546 may authorize subsequent appointments if the district court refuses to make their appointments. So it's kind of a textual argument, but these were valid regardless of the appointment. Even if the AG lacked the authority to appoint Lindsay Halligan, the indictments are still valid. Okay, so let's say her appointment was wrong. That doesn't mean the cases get dismissed. They say defendants do not dispute that one need not be a U.S. attorney to obtain and sign indictments, because that authority can be exercised by any attorney who is working for the government. A U.S. attorney being somebody who is presidentially appointed and Senate confirmed. But not all attorneys who are prosecutors in the U.S. government are presidentially appointed and Senate confirmed. Many prosecutors bring indictments and they don't meet those standards. Nor do they dispute that the AG employs broad authority to employ attorneys to prosecute crimes. And so whether Halligan is valid or not is irrelevant as a U.S. attorney, is irrelevant to whether she had the ability to bring an indictment. The only question is whether the order from Pam employed Halligan as a government lawyer and authorized her to prosecute a crime. It definitely did. Now, they respond that Halligan was not conferred the authority of a government attorney merely because the AG cited the wrong law, but whether she correctly cited her source of power is without legal significance. A concededly lawful delegation does not become unlawful simply because the delegating official failed to correctly cite the law right. Comey says Pam could not authorize Halligan to even be a lawyer, period. But that's irrelevant because she did have an appointment in a statutorily created office. And tellingly, when presented with the absurd consequence that Halligan would not be bound by grand jury secrecy if she were somehow not an attorney for the government, Comey says attorney for the government is different than a U.S. attorney. That claim is untenable. It burdens Halligan with certain responsibilities, but also simultaneously strips her from all power. The only plausible construction of the rules is that Halligan had both the authority and the obligations, even if she lacked the full authority of an interim U.S. attorney. And finally, even if the September 22nd order appointing Halligan as interim failed to make her as an attorney for the government, another order, October 31, made her a special attorney. That was effective September 22nd. Comey claims, says that because Pam came in and basically ratified, they said Halligan's in trouble, so they came out, issued a new order. But she was not attempting to ratify someone else's invalid appointment. She was simply clarifying the effective date of her own employment as a special attorney. And as the government pointed out in its opening brief, it is not uncommon for employers to formalize an employee's start date after the employee has already begun. Defendants do not even respond to that point, much less identify any other reasons why that is invalid. So for centuries, we've had the de facto officer doctrine to uphold this, saying defendants don't dispute this at all. Instead, they claim, like the district court, that this court may hold the de facto officer doctrine inapplicable. Comey tries to distinguish other cases. They rely on another Supreme Court case. But even if Halligan and her appointment violated the Appointments Clause, Supreme Court precedent requires applying the de facto officer doctrine. They say some of this has been overturned, but they can't point to a single case where the Supreme Court has declined to apply this doctrine to a non-adjudicatory officer. And so the indictments were also ratified anyways. Ultimately, it doesn't even matter whether Halligan is valid or not, because the AG Pam Bondi, who was duly confirmed, she ratified them in final. Defendants do not even defend the principal basis here that Pam could not ratify these. For good reason. The whole point of the ratification doctrine is for the principal to cure the actions of an unlawfully appointed agent, which is why this court and others have interpreted it accordingly for years. They are wrong that no court has ever applied anything like ratification to an indictment. Many courts have, citing a couple here. That makes sense because criminal prosecution, like most government activity, functions through principals and agents. And defendants cite no statutory evidence that Congress foreclosed ratification, meaning that Pam went and validated it after the fact. And they don't have any arguments against it. So instead, they claim ratification should not apply because it's about liberty. But what's the case law for that? They say they have none. Comey makes an argument, but not James, that his indictment could not be ratified because Pam Bondi lacked the authority to sign the indictment because of the statute of limitations. Comey has a real problem here because, or has a I think a valid point here, because they waited until like days before the statute expired, and then the ratification came after that. The statute of limitations, though, had not run because it stopped running when the grand jury returned an indictment. So it was still open, and the ratification could come back forward and validate the charges. Aside from the tolling effect of the indictment, the statute was also extended by 6 months following the dismissal. So that's another reason why Pam Bondi was not time barred and Comey can be charged. And lastly, Comey says that the superseding indictment would not apply because the original indictment was void. Not a serious argument, they say. Another section of the law authorizes re-indictment within 6 months if a felony indictment is dismissed for any reason. And so we can use that to extend the SOL and make Comey SOL. And by the way, any other defects in the indictments were all harmless error. Although they say that there was an error, it's not a fundamental error. It is a harmless error. We don't dismiss indictments just because there was a minor mistake. And that is the argument here. Comey's baseless and implausible speculation that the grand jurors in his case may have violated their oaths or committed egregious misconduct cannot sustain a claim of prejudice. And so from Henry C. Whitaker up to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, final reply saying the court should reverse the orders that came down below, reinstate the indictments against Letitia James and James Comey, and allow these charges to proceed because Lindsay Halligan was properly appointed. If she was not properly appointed, Pam Bondi properly ratified it. If Pam Bondi made a mistake, it's all harmless error, and these prosecutions should continue. So we'll see what the Fourth Circuit does. I'm not sure that they're going to be too in favor of reinstituting the charges. The lower level courts gave them a nice out on this. So this puppy might be going all the way up to SCOTUS, and we may see this down the line for further review if the Supreme Court accepts a petition, if the Fourth Circuit rejects these arguments. But we're now fully briefed up. James Comey has a bunch of people who are circling the wagons to defend him here. And of course, we're going to keep our eye on this one. We want justice, and Lindsay Halligan has been one of the few people who's actually delivered and brought indictments, which is why they have attacked her so aggressively. So we're going to be here to see what happens between Letitia and Comey. Thank you for subscribing and joining as we do. All right, we'll see where that one goes. We got one final update, my friends, and then we'll hear from you. Pam Bondi, now officially subpoenaed by the Oversight Committee. We knew that they took a vote on this thing, but now it is official. And in addition to that, the Oversight Committee is now demanding to speak with this woman, the Epstein prison guard, who was previously charged with crimes for falsifying records and then got a sweetheart plea deal at the end of the investigation and the prosecution. But here's how it all started today. We've got Oversight Committee saying, following a committee-wide vote, James Comer has now issued a subpoena to AG Pam Bondi to appear for a deposition regarding the DOJ's handling of Epstein and the Epstein Files Transparency Act. We'll read the letter in a moment, but the DOJ responded to this. They said, here's what the spokesperson said. He wrote back, this is Chad Pergram sharing this with us. He's over at the Fox News Corporation as a congressional correspondent. He said, from the DOJ, this subpoena is completely unnecessary. Lawmakers have been invited to view the unredacted files for themselves at the DOJ, and the AG has always made herself available to speak directly with members of Congress. She continues to have calls and meetings with members of Congress on the Epstein Files Transparency Act, which is why the department offered to brief the committee tomorrow. As always, we look forward to continuing to provide policymakers with the facts, and we'll see if this brief causes the Oversight Committee to withdraw the subpoena. Otherwise, Pam Bondi is going to be in there testifying under oath. And this could lead to some serious problems for her and others at the DOJ. Now, here is the short press release from Oversight. Following a full committee vote, many Republicans in favor of this, we now have the subpoena sent. We also know that they're going to be scheduled for a private briefing on this. We can see if we can quash these things before Pam Bondi gets dragged in there. But otherwise, here's what she just received, courtesy of Congress and the Oversight Committee. Saying, all right, Pam, the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform is reviewing the possible mismanagement of the federal government's investigation of Epstein and Maxwell and the circumstances of his death and the trafficking rings and the ways the government is effectively combating them. The ways in which Epstein and Maxwell sought to curry favor and exercise influence to protect their illegal activities and potential violations of ethics rules related to elected officials. In March, earlier this month, the committee voted to approve a motion directing this committee to send you a subpoena. Now we've done that. You better get your butt in here on April 14th. The committee has questions about how the DOJ handled this. And we've been screaming about this, that the DOJ is thinking that they can just post through this and that there won't be any blowback. I think this is really a serious risk for them. And we need you to come in here. As AG, you are directly responsible for overseeing the collection, review, and the determinations about the release of the files. And we believe you possess valuable information. We may use the results to inform federal law on trafficking and other investigations. We have broad authority to do this, which is why we're doing it under the laws. And so you better come in here courtesy of James Comer. So the DOJ saying, we don't need to come in. We'll have a private briefing with you. We'll see if that satiates them or not, but I don't think it's going to. And the real concern here is it's not just Democrats who are going after the DOJ. We know that even Nancy Mace and others say, finally, we've officially subpoenaed Bondi after the committee passed our motion to subpoena her earlier this month. She will appear for a depo to answer questions under oath, right? So if you lie under oath, you're in trouble. No more delays, no more dodging, no more redactions. We look forward to Pam Bondi's answers. That's Nancy Mace. And another Republican is Thomas Massie. And he's saying the DOJ, it's not just that they're stalling or not being cooperative. It's that there's a cover-up happening, courtesy of Thomas Massie. So let's hypothesize a scenario where the Democratic Party takes over the House, impeachment proceedings start. They're going to be joined by a lot of Republicans if they go after Pam or Todd or anybody else in that chain of command.
And finally, I know the DOJ wants to say they're done with this document production. The problem is they've taken down documents before we were able to go over to the DOJ and look at the unredacted versions. They took down some of the most significant documents, two of them involving Virginia Giuffre's case and other things. The picture of Epstein in a room where it's got CIA written on the boxes, that's been taken down. We want to be able to look at all these files. They can't keep those documents down after they've already produced them. And finally,
all right, so that's Massie. You've got Mace. You've got many others who will jump all over this. And the Oversight Committee is also looking into this woman. Her name is Tava Noel, and she was charged with crimes after Epstein died, however that happened, allegedly. And now Comer is seeking a transcribed interview with her, saying that Comer today requested that Tova Noel, one of Epstein's prison guards, come for a transcribed interview on March 26, explaining to date, the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee has also conducted interviews with a bunch of other people. Bill Barr, Ghislaine Maxwell, Les Wexner, Clinton, Hillary, and Bill, Richard Kahn, and more. And Darren Indike will be there on March 19th, which of course is this week. And we'll see what comes of that. But we also saw this woman was originally charged with falsifying records on two dates, August 9th and 10th, saying when they published this back November 19, 2019, shortly after Epstein died, that they made false records saying that they checked the cell. They never did. Jeffrey Berman brought charges against her, two people, Tova Noel and this other guy called Michael Thomas, for making false records and then lying about it, attempting to defraud the United States. He said they had a duty to ensure the safety of all of this, and they didn't do that, and so now they're charged with crimes. They repeatedly failed to complete the mandatory checks at the housing unit. To conceal their failure, they repeatedly signed false certifications attesting to have conducted these rounds. As a result of those false statements, they believed the prisoners were being regularly monitored. They were not. And then, of course, Epstein was dead or escaped or whatever. The MCC is a federal detention facility. They're not allowed to do these things. She's been employed there since 2016, another one since 2007. They are supposed to guard the inmates to make 30-minute rounds in each area. Epstein, of course, July 6, was arrested and charged and then apparently was dead not much later. And they didn't do their job. On August 9th, this person was assigned to work in the SHU. And so was the other guy. Noel and Thomas were also responsible for completing forms to say that they conducted those checks. They didn't do those checks. They repeatedly failed to do them. Instead, they browsed the internet and moved around the common area. Aside from two other officers who briefly visited this, no one else entered, no one conducted the reviews, and then they lied about it. To conceal their failure, they signed false certificates attesting to have conducted the counts. They didn't do that. As a result of those false reports, we thought that they were doing things that they were not doing, and so now they got charged with pretty serious crimes. Conspiracy to defraud, making false records, 5 years in prison is the maximum sentence. Now, what's interesting about this is once the case developed a little bit, we can see the docket right here. We had some activity that occurred over a couple of years. So she was charged in 2019. And ultimately, the end result of her criminal charges was a deferred prosecution. Saying here from the prosecutor, Nicholas Roos, back December 13, 2021, filed a null pros, which is nulling out the prosecution. On or about November 19th, a grand jury indicted her. They committed multiple offenses, conspiring to knowingly defraud, make false statements, false writings, and more. Then on May 20th, they entered into a deferred prosecution agreement. Amazing. Under the agreements, what happens? Prosecution will be deferred for 6 months And as long as they complete community service and don't get in trouble again for 6 months, the United States will dismiss the case, essentially. They'll file a null pros, and the prosecution will stop. Like, the prosecutor is refusing to continue to prosecute because you've complied with the terms. So what happened is pretrial service informed the government that they did comply with the terms of the agreement. All of that expired November 20th. And so, boom, cases gone. And now they continue on. And we're learning more strange things about this woman. Like, she made a mysterious deposit of $5,000 into her account 10 days before Epstein was ultimately eliminated or removed. Tova is one of the two who was charged right there. She also was Googling latest on Epstein in jail. And she was Googling a bunch of stuff, but that's a big one. Googled it twice. Then another one found him dead. She searched it 40 minutes before Epstein was dead by hanging. Yeah. She was also shopping for furniture online after she got that $5,000 payday. And there was a forensic examination that did a full review on her. And so she's going to be called in. Oh, yeah. There's Epstein. Look at him. You can see it. So, of course, that's her. And here are some of the searches that happened right there. Latest on Epstein in jail. And apparently she got 7 cash deposits totaling $11,000. So they're bringing her in here. She drove a $62,000 Land Rover, Range Rover. Wasn't asked about that cash during the DOJ interview. And then she got a null pros, 6 months, little community service, no repercussions at all. She's now being called in to testify. So here's what James Comer sent to her. The Committee on Oversight is now investigating Epstein. The alleged mismanagement of the federal government's investigation, circumstances around his death, the operation of rings, ways in which they sought to curry favor, potential violations of ethics rules. Due to public reporting, we think that your info is going to be helpful. So come here, March 26 in Washington, D.C., signed by James Comer, and we'll see if she shows. It's not a subpoena yet. It's a voluntary invitation. If she doesn't show, I'm sure they'll escalate it from there. Now, earlier last week, James Comer came out and said they had just finished with an interview of his accountant, Epstein's accountant. And Epstein's accountant once again confirms Trump's not in this at all.
First of all, Mr. Khan's answering every question thus far. He's completed 2 full hours of depositions. I would say we are possibly at the halfway point. It could last more than 4 hours, but he confirmed there were 5 clients that paid money to Epstein, and that was Les Wexner, Lynn Dubin, Stephen Sinofsky, the Rothschilds, and Leon Black. We've already deposed Wexner, and we're going to be deposing Leon Black very soon. Mr. Khan testified under oath that, because the Democrats asked this question, that he had never seen any type of transaction to Trump or anyone in his family. That makes the 5th witness now that's testified under oath that they've never seen any involvement by Donald Trump or their family. That includes Khan, Bill Clinton, Wexner, Acosta, and Barr. So I know that's the obsession of a lot of the media with respect to the Epstein investigation, but I will again remind you, the investigation's about getting the truth to the American people, trying to figure out how the government failed, answer questions we all have. Was he an agent? Was our government involved in any type of cover-up in any way, shape, or form? And finally, what can be done to prevent this from happening in the future?
All right, so we'll have more information will be revealed, no doubt about it. We then saw that Todd Blanche was on with the Katie Miller podcast, wife to Stephen Miller at the White House, and a very interesting exchange happened here, and she pressed Todd Blanche on this pretty aggressively. Shout out to her, Katie Miller, for digging in on the truth behind the Epstein files. Here is this exchange.
As I've said, I'm the biggest conspiracy theorist you'll ever find. So when the Epstein story exploded, people online immediately connected it to the Pizzagate conspiracy theory about elite child trafficking rings. Did investigators check for any connection between Epstein and the Pizzagate controversy?
Well, when you say did investigators track the Pizzagate conspiracy theory, has been debunked repeatedly by law enforcement, not by me, by law enforcement. And I know that there's been a fair amount of searches around those certain terms.
Sure, it was totally debunked. And then you look at what happened with Epstein, where a wealthy, well-connected man was actually trafficking underage girls in elite circles. And then you begin to think, maybe things aren't a real conspiracy theory.
Well, but again, the only thing we can do in a conspiracy theory, Katie, is investigate. Okay, so it's easy to say on X or to say, I think there's an issue here, but how do we, let's investigate. So we investigated all the times that the certain buzzwords associated with Pizzagate were in the Epstein files, and you can do the same thing. And users
I've read all the pages.
And many of those, at least as far as my understanding is of the conspiracy theory, don't line up with the conspiracy theory at all. If all of them, frankly. But so I'm not sure. I am aware that the word pizza is in the Epstein files, among other things.
Does a client list exist? Is
A
the government
client list,
does an
meaning what?
Epstein client list exist, and is the government in possession of it?
No, I mean, listen, everything, I could ask you the same question, right? Because everything's been released. So there's what's commonly referred to as the client list, if I were speculating, is the black book that has been released for years and years and years that was basically Epstein's address book. There was a list of masseuses. It's not a client list, obviously. A lot of those women were actually victims. That exists, but I don't even, to be honest with you, I don't know what a client list is, and I'm not trying to be naive, but what would a client list consist of? You mean a list of Mr. Epstein's, the people he was supposedly blackmailing? Is it people that were
compromise.
his business clients, his personal clients? But no, I have not seen such a list.
Another theory is that Epstein is well connected to foreign intelligence services. Do you have any evidence of him being a spy or a plant for another foreign country?
No, there's no evidence of that. And we did look at that extensively, not only this administration, but every administration that's been involved in Epstein could look at that. And there's no evidence that he was associated with, well, let me just not say there's no evidence. The evidence that people say exists does not point to him being any part of foreign intelligence. Now, as I will say repeatedly, I did not know Epstein. I was not part of those investigations. So I'm answering your question based upon what I know, based upon my investigation as a Deputy Attorney General for the past 11 months or so. So, but from what I have seen in the files and from what I understand happened during all the investigations, there's zero evidence of that.
And they've been consistent about that and have said repeatedly that there's really no there. Epstein was just a pervert who abused women. Maxwell helped facilitate that, but nobody else was involved. No financial crimes, no third parties. Later in the interview, they talk a little bit more about Reid Hoffman and how he's went to the island and things like that. But from the DOJ's perspective, they can't charge anybody because they already released that exonerating letter where they said, we've done our investigation and there is no further investigation or criminal charges that are coming. They hope that everybody would move on. Then Congress demanded and passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act. And here we are. So we'll see what these interviews look like. We'll see if Pam Bondi and her subpoena are ultimately valid or enforced after the press briefing or the private briefing that occurs today. And we'll see what the guard has to say in response to the demand that she come and testify. Of course, we'll be here. We'll keep our eye on it. Thank you for subscribing and joining as we do. All right, friends. Well, that was a doozy today. We had some good updates and a lot of news. We had updates on the deep state hacking and then betraying the president, burying information and hiding it from him because they called him a Vulgarian in the White House and they did not want their intelligence products to go over there and influence White House policy. We looked at this gentleman named Barry Zulauf, who wrote this big report walking us through all the weaponization, the partisanship, and the perversion of the intelligence operations that were gathering information, how things were stalled out and suppressed, how there was pressure coming from on high to figure out how to make it lean a certain way. And of course, that is inappropriate. They are supposed to just analyze and report, not analyze and distort. Then we talked about Chuck Grassley and had a fun update on the Mueller report, where a new FBI 302 has been released detailing an FBI internal investigation and communications with other people who are a part of the Mueller team, who said that it was also perverted, that they had Trump caricatures, that they made derogatory statements about the president from the top investigators, that they were manipulating and abusing classified information, not following standard procedures, and of course, drinking on the job when they shouldn't have been doing that. We looked at the Comey appeal in the Fourth Circuit, which now has its final reply brief. And it was a long kind of a technical argument, not as juicy and interesting as we might otherwise hope. It's all very specific about whether the Attorney General can make a proper appointment of Lindsay Halligan to successive interim appointments. And we'll see what the Fourth Circuit has to say about it. I'm sure this will probably go up to the Supreme Court either way, regardless of how this turns down. But Letitia and Comey, they're not out yet, and they have a bunch of Democrat lawyers who are coming in to assist them. Then we talked about the Pam Bondi subpoena. We knew that the vote happened. Now the subpoena has officially flown out. We also have a demand out for Tova Noel to come and testify about what she knows about Epstein's death and why she lied and manipulated prison reports to try to cover up her role in actually doing her job, which was supposed to be checking on Epstein, and she didn't do that. She got off on a very light sweetheart plea deal, a null pros after 6 months, a little bit community service. No further there, according to Todd Blanche and to Katie Miller. But now, my friends, it's time to hear from you. And happy Wednesday. Hopefully your week is unfolding beautifully well. Very glad that you're here and with us. I saw a couple of nice donos come in, and we'll say what's up to some friends. And then if you're a member, come join us for the members only after party. We're going to hang out for a little bit, and then we're going to pack up. We hit the road tomorrow. We're heading out to DC to see what we can do to help save America, you know? So what's going on? We had Sev Russ is here. What's up? We got Robert Mueller's press conference is also here. Says, good luck with the whole saving America thing. Robert Mueller press conference. We got some work cut out for us, don't we there, Robert Mueller? What is that from? Showtime movie? Thank you for that, Muffin Rando. What's up, Sev Russ? Says, you moving to DC probably means we'll never get a workout together. But at least I can still work out to your stream. Safe travels. Sev Russ, that just means you got to come out to DC. We'll go hit the weights out there, my man. Yeah, come out there. I think there's a big Gold's Gym out there. I was looking these up. There's a Capitol Hill gym. There's a couple other locations. It's summer season, man. Next time you're out there, hit me up and we'll go do some bench press together, you know? We got to outlift the left. So, it's very important. Thank you, Severus. Thanks for the dono and thanks for the well wishes. Old Coach said Solomon is never wrong. Trust the plan and Trump. And says a RICO is incoming. Trust the plan and Trump. I hope you're right about that, Old Coach Crane. I know that there are rumors that there is a grand jury that has been impaneled in Florida, and we hope that that results in monster amounts of indictments, baby. Old Coach, thanks for a couple of the donos there. Hey, Tom C. says, hi, Robert. Are you aware that YouTube is now for a few days interjecting ads that overwrite your show rather than cut and insert as was previously done? Information is lost. No, I'm not aware of that. I actually thought, so I haven't changed anything in the last few days. I haven't changed anything at all, really, in a long time. But I wasn't aware of that. I thought I got an update from, YouTube that said that they were not going to be doing that. Like they would just like move it to the side and then show an ad. I don't know. YouTube is changing a lot of things. They keep rolling out new features. I'm sorry about that, Tom C. That's not really good. We don't want it to interfere with the show. But thank you, Tom, for the heads up. And thank you, Muffin, for grabbing that for us. Interesting. Maybe they'll change it back soon. I'm not sure. Hey, what's up, Joe? What's up, Joe? Afro Man is being sued for defamation after what he says was an unjust raid and that they stole his cash. Look up Lick 'em Low Lisa video. Afro Man. Is that like a rapper or something? I'm not sure who that is. Joe, sounds like it could be a spicy one. We don't like unjust raids. Was it politicization again? Hey, Nelson R. Grand. What's up, Nelson? Thank you, Rob. Dr. G examines Ep video cover-up. Dr. G Explains examines the Epstein video cover-up. That's another recommendation to another channel. Dr. G Explains. Man, sounds like a good one. Nelson Grand, thank you for being here. Thank you for being a member for 4 months. We really appreciate that. And stick around for the after party. We'll debrief a little bit and see what else is happening out there. And thank you, Muffin Rando, for clipping those for us. Let's see what else is happening on locals. And then we'll call it a day before we head to our after party. Let's see what else. Oh, we got some nice donos over here, too. Thank you for these. Oh, my goodness, Rick D. That is a hell of an image right there. All right, go to locals if you want to see a giant Kool-Aid outfitted person. The quote is, Fanny in her natural made away from the cameras. Gosh, that's a hell of an outfit. Hey, Chubby, what's up? Who wants to bet the deep state used those Chinese IDs to cast those mysteriously disappearing 20 million votes that Biden got? Yeah, and it doesn't even need to be 20 million. They just need a couple, 10,000 here, 10,000 there, and you pick up Georgia and Arizona. Ridiculous. Yeah. Ridiculous. Thank you, Chubby. And then our CIA and our own intelligence agencies, even the people working for Trump, are not providing that info to him and to us. Trump would have absolutely told us if he knew that the Chinese had stolen our voter lists. Bill Barr, remember Bill Barr? No, there's no evidence of election fraud. Did you look at the Chinese stealing the voter list and importing tens of thousands of fake IDs? No, he didn't. Thank you, Chubby. Maybe Tulsi's holding back for midterms, for bombshell drops. It might be an ongoing investigation. That would explain her Fulton. Fulton, for sure, is, I would say, an ongoing investigation. Like that has had some developments. Like they got evidence now. It's going to take a little bit more time. So you might be right. And there might be a RICO. I don't know. I think that if you indict a bunch of people before the midterms, it kind of makes things squirrely out there, right? Then you have a bunch of senators who come out and say, oh, I don't know, this is appropriate. This is political weaponization or whatever. So I think like the best time to have done it would have been in the first year, not as we inch closer to the midterms, just in terms of politics. But, you know, politics and criminal law, they're two kind of separate tracks. Really, one should not have anything to do with the other, but they do. So do you drop those right now and then kind of shake the tree a little bit, shake the field up? I don't know. We're going to see. Thank you, Chubby. Hey, Mizzy M, thank you for the nice dono. Hey, safe travels. I listened to your show on Judge Van Dyke and the swinging D's from last week. Oh, yeah. That was a good one. We did that on Saturday last week. The swinging D's. That was a good one. Gives me hope for the judicial system. More like him, please. That sounds like a great name for a big band era swing band. I think somebody made a meme about that. Yeah, somebody in the swinging D's. Like, oh, gosh. That was a great decision. Yeah, we read that on a Saturday member stream. That was a lot of fun. Mizzy M, thank you for the nice dono. And thank you for the safe travel wishes. We appreciate that. Schlista, I know you didn't cover, but O'Keefe has a new video exposing voting fraud in California. Easily Pam and Cash can investigate and prosecute this, but they aren't. So I ask, why do we even need the SAVE Act when the feds won't even prosecute obvious voter fraud that we have on the books today? Cali can still cheat if they want because no one will do anything. So in the end, it just makes it harder for legit voters, and illegal voters will still happen until the feds start prosecuting. Yeah, I mean, and maybe that goes back to Chubby's comment about maybe you drop a bunch of voting fraud indictments right before the midterms, and then that disincentivizes the voting fraud. But like, you want to start cleaning this stuff up before the elections, or maybe they're, not worried about the midterms as much as they are about the next presidential election, and the fraud gets cleaned up after the midterms. Then the indictments come down later. But yeah, I mean, and that's the thing too, like same thing with the Minnesota voter fraud. There's a lot of fraud that feels like it's not being addressed at all, other than people just talking about it. And YouTubers like Nick Shirley and James O'Keefe exposing it all. Thank you, Schlista. I have not watched that one, but I have it in the queue. And they're doing great work out there. It's inspiring, E. Texley, should the Rothschilds count as the equivalent of a state actor? They seem to continue to swing influence in high-level politics. Macron is a former Rothschild banker. That is an overt connection. The Rothschilds always don't operate with transparency, etc. British bond market manipulation and the Battle of Waterloo. Yeah, and they're in the Epstein files. Like, Epstein facilitated a deal between the DOJ and the Rothsteins. The Rothschild. Not the Steens. Hey, what's up? CK Dolores. I swear and thank you, eTextly, for the nice tip. We appreciate that. CK Dolores. I swear I'll smash my TV if they don't ask her about the lack of indictments and her Blanche saying that there's no one to indict. They've already written a letter. We've read it multiple times here, which is wild. They should have rolled up Lex yesterday and figured out who that J email address went to. He enjoyed the torture. I read Zorro was finally getting searched. Look at those, looking for bodies. 2 bodies mentioned in the email. Blanche is angering me, says CK. I hear blah, 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 ain't gonna do nothing. Just a smooth talker from CK Dolores. I appreciate that Katie Miller kind of pressed him a little bit on that. And you could see it in her face. Katie Miller was like, really, Todd? Really? And so that was fun. CK, thank you for the tip. We got some locals comments we're going to come say hello to. Coming up, the Dr. Ginger Price. What's up, Dr. Ginger Price? Thank you for becoming a member. We'll see you in just a minute. We're going to have a members only after party. We'll debrief. And then we're packing up and getting ready to hit the road bright and early tomorrow. So tomorrow's schedule will be a little bit off. But we should post at least some updates over on our travel out to DC. Hey, what's up, Nanny? Good to see you, Nanny. Spicy comment. Says, we need severe consequences for people who keep breaking the law. American people went to jail because they lie. Nanny, thank you for the comment. Alan, all of us have been betrayed by deep state actors. Why would Satan's children act any other way? It's a good question, Alan. Power and influence is their currency, and they don't really care about the things they claim to care about, which is, of course, democracy, liberty, freedom, those things. They don't care about that. They just care about power and money. Hey, Muffin Rando, Afro Man case is perfect old school Rob bad cop content case. They raided his house, stole his money, broke his door, and then sued him. Gosh. Yeah, that does sound like a bad popo, our bad popo days. We're thinking about getting into some criminal law. I mean, there's some good criminal cases out there. So I'm always open to suggestions since, we're not getting a lot of indictments here. We would like to cover the indictments, but there's not much of that happening. So maybe we'll get into some criminal law again. Those were some good cases. All right. So friends, it's been a beautiful day. We're going to have a members only after party. If you're on Locals, YouTube, or on Substack, stick around. We're going to debrief, chat for a little bit. See what you thought of the show. See what else is percolating out there. And then we'll wrap it up here. And, of course, we'll have some updates, hopefully tomorrow and Friday. And then, of course, be back in full next week from Washington, D.C., which should be an interesting new chapter. And we're excited about the trip. So, friends, thanks once again for being here. Big thank yous to our mods and meme smiths who are out there. Thank you, Muffin Rando, for clipping for us on the day. Friends, thank you for the nice donos. Want to also shout out Donut Mind Me, John in the house. We got Carrie B, K Bean, Neuro D, Janek, Dog Digger over on the Rumbles. We got Elliot, Just Rhonda, and Geegum modding the fort down for us. And friends, I hope you have a beautiful Wednesday. All downhill from here. And we'll come back very soon to get into it again. So thank you for subscribing. Thank you for hitting the notification bell, especially for tomorrow and for Friday as we post some updates on our trip out. But it's going to be a beautiful rest of our week. It's going to be busy. Sounds like there's a lot of stuff that is cooking out there. So we'll check back in here very soon. But thanks for joining us today. Hopefully, until we're back here, you're out there accomplishing all the things you set your mind to. And you join us when we come back very shortly. But until we do, have a great day. And of course, come back because we need to see you right back here so that together, with your help, we can shine that big, beautiful spotlight of accountability and transparency and justice down upon our system with the hope of finding justice. Botch that one. My friends, make it a beautiful day. Have a great Wednesday. Have a great week ahead. We'll see you right back here very soon. Until then, be well and bye.
Thanks for watching, my beautiful friends. Now it's that time where the stream must end. You brought the heat with every chat and line. Together we expose corruption. One more time we dove in the truth where the media hides. Lit up the lies with seats on all sides. The fight isn't over, but we made them sweat. We ain't done yet, no, not just yet. Because together we are